Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream. Feeling hot and sweaty and enjoying a nice little heat wave here in France, so excuse my crazy hair and glistening scalp. It's swampy out here. Hopefully you guys are someplace cool. So we're going to continue working on this Lynx spider model. Just starting to dial in some of the details now. As you can see, and here's my reference images in PureRef, and so I was starting to focus on the cephalothorax last week. So let's continue working on that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the legs. Let's do this. I always forget about this wonderful feature right here. These little visibility presets. So let's turn on visibility preset 1, and that means that I have the head and the ciliary and the eyes visible. Or is that 2? Let's see. That's right here. Oh, I'm going to turn on the eyes. Don't need that. Here's the eyes down here. Okay. So working on this, and this is nice because you can store, you don't have to constantly turn things on and off. So in this one I just have the head, sorry, the cephalothorax visible. This one I have everything visible, and then I don't have any presets set for these guys. But it's very convenient. And let me see where I can find my brush. And we're taking a look at this just before I started here. You can see that there's this piece right here. It's like this membrane between basically the face and the ciliary, which are these large structures right here, which hold in little fangs, which I haven't added yet. So we can add this in here, and notice there's also kind of a straight line here too. So I'm going to use the SK cloth to kind of dial this in. Let's move this down a little bit. Make it a little bit straighter, but we want to have a little space in here. And then I'm going to use this to kind of straighten this out. It's probably a bit too intense. Let's bring down the Z intensity. The U is the hotkey for the Z intensity slider, by the way. Do that. Put this down here. We'll kind of fix it a little bit later and look at some other views. It's very faint, but I can see it in some of the other images. There is kind of a division that goes down here from right here. Oops. The Alt key. Thanks very much. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully it's not too hot or sweaty where you are. Let's bring this down to Z intensity. And just rough up the face a little bit. Not too much because I don't want to lose this, which I was working last week, but just a little bit. And then for this sort of membrane right here, which I've seen on other spiders as well, I'm going to add a new piece of geometry in there. And so what I'll do is I'll just append a star, this guy right here, W, pull up let's do a polysphere. There we go, creature done. Let's do this. Subdivide it a few times. And for now, I think I'm just going to keep it as a sphere. Sometimes for this kind of stuff I do Dynamesh, which I might do, but right now it might work just as fine with this sphere. This is kind of a cool membrane that you can see if you look at videos on YouTube of spiders like chewing and stuff. You can see it's very flexible, kind of nice little detail. Kind of gross too. Well, I don't think it's gross, but I mean, if you want to talk about gross, think of the human mouth. Now, that's pretty gross. I often wonder if you were a dentist, what kind of nightmares you would have. I can only imagine they would be pretty horrific. Constantly spending all day long looking at people's mouths. I mean, be interesting. Not for me. When I lived in LA, I had a dental hygienist who I liked very much. Her name was Sherry. She was fantastic. But she also happened to be the dental hygienist for Armand Shimmerman, who you guys might recognize the name. He's an actor. He's been in a lot of stuff, including Quark on Deep Space Nine, and also Principal Snyder on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as well as a whole lot of other great series. So, but the funny thing, of course, is my dental hygienist, she was not really a sci-fi buff, so we talk a little bit, you know, because it was LA, so everybody knew actors somewhere. We talk a little bit about it, but I just remember it was really funny because she couldn't remember if he was on Star Wars or Star Trek or what he was on. But I was really excited to hear about this, so I asked her to get an autographed picture of Armand Shimmerman, and he was really nice. I mean, he didn't go to the same dentist. This is too much detail for the story, really. I never met the guy in person, but I did get a nice autographed picture of him as Quark, which I'll dig up when I get a chance and hang on my wall so you guys can check it out. But it's kind of weird to think that her hands were in his mouth and then they were in my mouth. That'll give you nightmares. I think the teeth that he wore as Quark were not his actual real teeth. It's Ferengi teeth. Ferengis don't really have dentists. Well, they do have dentists because the sharper the knife, the sweeter the deal? I forget. Anyways, I'm a huge Star Trek nerd, so I love it. So I think I am going to Dynamesh this. Give it a fairly low resolution. A little higher than that. I always kind of just guesstimate my Dynamesh resolutions. I don't put a whole lot of thought into it as long as I get enough that I can work with, because I'm going to ZRemesh it eventually. So I don't sit around trying to get the perfect value. But if you are concerned about your Dynamesh resolution, instead of using the regular Dynamesh controls, you can go into Gizmo, open up the deformers here, and use Remesh by Dynamesh. And then if you use that, you can actually use this little slider here to determine exactly how many points you want your Dynamesh to be. Problem with this is its limit is 1,000,000, so it won't go higher than 1,000,000. But let's say I want to do something like, I don't know, probably 57,000 is plenty. I just leave it at that, and then choose accept. And then you can see, yeah, it's about 52,000. The problem with this Dynamesh setting is it's based on the actual size of the object, the scale of the object. So if your object is really big, you can end up setting the resolution to a low value and get a really overly dense mesh. Or if your object is really small, you end up with a really low resolution, even if this is really high. So that could be kind of confusing too. And then there is a plugin for Dynamesh, I think it's called Dynamesh Master. I don't remember if I have it installed or not, which can make working with Dynamesh a bit easier. But most of the time, the reason I like these settings is because I like to be able to just control, drag, and release to re-Dynamesh every once in a while. But I do find Dynamesh to be extremely useful because I just like blocking out the pieces, then doing a quick Z-remesh, and then it's a very fast way to work. And then, of course, you can also combine it with Sculptress. I don't really need to do that right now because this is not a very detailed piece, but Dynamesh and Sculptress together is also a really nice way to work. Okay, so we'll call that okay for now. What I'll do is maybe do a little bit more detail here and then do a quick Z-remesh. So, turn on the solo button. And I'll do a Z-remesh about half. Topology on this thing doesn't have to be anything special, just good enough. I'm going to go back in time here with the undo slider to right here, store this history state. Let's go back one more, store this history state. And then go up here, subdivide, Control D, and then just do a project history so I can bring that detail back. There we go. That'll work. And let's save this. He already looks a little bit better with that, although this looks like little legs now and this looks like a little pair of shorts. So I don't know, maybe that's what it is. Let's take a look at some of the other details here on the cephalothorax. I was looking at one image before that has some nice detail in it. This is a little bit low res. Let's see. There we go. That one's kind of nice. So I think what we'll do is I'm going to take the clay tubes here and just do a little bit of a demarcation around this detail right here. Let's first select it. I think this is a little bit different from one individual to the next, but I think what I want to do is I like how this is kind of, this little fur line or whatever you want to call it is kind of closer to the eyes. So I'm going to just draw a little line here, and then that will be the edge of my furry part. I have this detail from another image because I liked it. I thought it was kind of cool. So I'll keep that. So we're just going to kind of combine details from different spiders here, or different individual lynx spiders. Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Let's draw a little bit of lines here, and then let me see, this is 1 million points, so let's increase this. Divide it again. Let's save this. And then proportions of the cephalothorax I got from diagrams, this right here. And I think I'm going to keep it the way it is. I think this one, if I look at this image, this distance right here seems a bit shorter than this distance to here, but I think that's partly because of the lens length. So it's coming across as being a little bit isometric. So this looks like a shorter distance than this, but I'm going to keep this distance and just say that my guy has a longer head. So I'm going to draw this little division down here, and then let's go in here and smooth this a little bit. Itty bitty spider is my guy. I love this color of green though, it's so fantastic. And what I'll do is I'm going to go back to my clay tubes and just kind of roughen this a little bit. Just to get that a little bit of that texture going, you know, you can see in here, you know, and I'll smooth it out using a smooth brush. Of course, this is being super symmetrical at the moment, but later on I'll add some asymmetry. And then we have kind of like these just very subtle kind of lines in here and lumps and bumps in darker areas. So I want to kind of get that in here as well because I think it's a cool detail. So I'll use the SK cloth brush and I'm just going to kind of etch this in here like this, kind of like that, and I'm overdoing it a little bit, but I'm going to go over it with clay tubes here, so that'll kind of knock it back. But get some of this detail going in here. And clay tubes. Excuse me, it's a little bit late here. It's been a long day because of the heat. I'm used to the dry climate of LA. This is very humid here. In France. They do have a very cool art scene here in La Rochelle. A lot of support for cinema and dance and music and stuff. It's very cool. They have little festivals downtown by the pier. They just had a music festival recently. And they're doing a cinema festival as well. So there's a lot going down around here. And then the movie that I saw, what did I see this weekend? I saw the live action How to Train Your Dragons movie, which is pretty good. I'm still kind of torn. I do like the original of that movie very much. I like the character design, but I think they did a pretty good job. I just, the live action trend is, of course, kind of irritating because it's not really necessary. But at the same time, it's entertainment. It's not like, before they had movies, nobody complained about, oh, they're doing Hamlet again. It's like, yeah, of course they're doing Hamlet again. And it's not a huge deal to re-envision things. It's a little bit irritating because obviously it's a safe bet on the part of the studios. They know they already have a built-in audience, so they're essentially doing a remake. And then with something with like How to Train Your Dragon, what they're doing basically is it's a mostly CG movie still with some live action actors. It's still mostly CG. It's just different style than the original, but it's still a pretty good movie. And the animation on the dragon, the main dragon, was so amazing. It's a great character design too. And then of course the movie I saw before that was the live action Lilo and Stitch, which was pretty good too. Same thing, mostly CG with some live that one actually had more live action stuff in it. But it's so funny because I didn't recognize Zach Galifianakis at all. Because he looks so different. I was like, wow, it looks like they tried to get an actor who looked like Zach Galifianakis, but not quite. And then of course at the end credits I was like, nope, it's actually him. Guy's got range, right? He plays weirdos. Mostly. So I'm just kind of roughing this up a little bit with the clay tubes brush and then smoothing it. Get some kind of lumpiness. I'm going to shift D, downshift to a lower subdivision level and smooth it even more so that I get rid of some of those brush strokes and just get mostly just kind of a lumpiness to it. And then press D to go back up to the higher subdivision level. And then what I might do is get the old Damien standard and kind of, just go through here and add just a little bit of detail here and smooth it out. I don't want to overdo it because it's kind of a subtle change. But this is going to be such a really translucent model that it's okay to overdo the deets, because it's going to get lost in that translucency. So it's okay to dig in there a little bit and creates a little bit of randomness there. So that looks pretty good. Let's take a look here. I think along here I want a sharper edge. So let's pull this down a little bit. And so if you saw last week, I kind of made up the details in the bottom because I don't have a good, I based them on another spider, so they're not completely made up. A similar spider, but I don't have good reference to the bottom of this particular spider. I'm going to straighten that out a little bit, kind of like a curtain, and then go down here with SK cloth. Let's, and then just kind of embolden that edge, and embiggen the edge. Sorry about that. I want to get a little close to my screen because my arm's getting tired stretching all that way. I'm using a Cintiq, by the way. You can't tell. I'm just going to go in here and rough this up a little bit. I might actually get into painting this part of the model tonight just so it's gets some variety and get some color on there. Just for fun. Play with some materials and a little bit of redshift rendering. I think I have redshift installed on here, but I gotta double check. Anybody got some cool spider stories out there? Share your spider stories. This model is for my live stream. It's just for you guys. Although I am doing some models for various other clients and stuff like that. It's all under NDA, so we can't really talk about it, but I did a similar spider for the Griffith Observatory Planetarium show, Signs of Life, which is a really cool show and a lot of fun. It's one of the most fun projects I've ever had a chance to work on. There's nothing like seeing your models on a planetarium dome. That's really cool. And I got to do spiders and flies and microorganisms and things like that. And even some aliens at the very end. Oops, sorry, spoiler alert. Net Wild, you mean like National Geographic? Or I'm not sure what you mean by Net Wild. That's some nice roughness there. It's starting to look like something. You see, just kind of roughing it over with a clay tubes brush kind of gets it more towards the organic side, and just a little bit of detail in there. And then what I'll do is, I think I'm going to keep symmetry on for now, but later on I'll go over it again with symmetry off, so it's not so obviously symmetrical. And then what I'm going to do down here is kind of dig into this a little bit. And this is the sockets where the legs come out right here. Let's make sure I have that correct. Obviously I can move the legs, so yeah, it's pretty close. I should do is a schizomid at some point. I've done a few of those. Schizomids are a type of arachnid. They're not a spider, but they are really, really cool. And my favorite is the species name is Draculoides bramstrokeri. So some scientist had a lot of fun naming that one because it looks freaking evil and kind of sexy too, I guess, if you're into that kind of thing. I mean, Dracula should be good looking, right? Not like that Nosferatu punk. Who does he think he is? Well, he still gets ladies. My wife and I have become somewhat fascinated with the with this Dracula story recently, because obviously Nosferatu movie came out, and then Luc Besson has his own version of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which should be coming out soon. Looks pretty cool. And I love the Francis Ford Coppola version of Bram Stoker's Dracula, in spite of the fact that some of the performances are not super great. Keanu Reeves, which is too bad. But if you watch, there's a great episode of Red Letter Media where they talk about that movie, and on YouTube, which is really worth a watch because I didn't really quite understand the point of Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, obviously, other than the fact that it's Dracula, but I don't know why it was such a strange movie, because if you watch it, it's like the effects, even for 1990s, seems a bit off. A lot of it just seems really, really odd. But the way they analyzed it, it's like it's really more of a tribute to filmmaking than it is movie in itself. It's an homage to old style filmmaking. So all the visual effects are in camera, except for I think one or two. And it's really just kind of bizarrely over the top. A lot of people really can't stand Anthony Hopkins' version of Van Helsing in that movie, but I absolutely love it. I think he's fantastic. I think Van Helsing should be very, very weird. There's no way somebody should be going around saying, I'm a vampire slayer, and be treated as like a normal person, even back then. So I thought that was a great performance, and I think Gary Oldman is amazing in it. Costume design is fantastic. There's some good YouTube videos in the costume design of that movie which are worth watching. It explains why Dracula has these bizarro, like Asian robes and that kind of stuff. It's really cool. And then the armor design at the beginning of the movie is just so weird. Everything about it is just so freaking weird. Love it. I just wish that Keanu Reeves had a better chance. I mean, I like Keanu Reeves just fine. I think he's great person. And he's a fine actor for what he does. But it seemed like in that movie, he seemed really stiff, and then the British accent was not as good as it could be. But Gary Oldman's awesome. And then I just finished rewatching all of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is a TV show I love. It's also very, very flawed, but a great show. The visual effects in that one are really terrible, especially in the first few seasons. But, you know, it was like, you know, late 90s, early thousands. Back when studios that size, I think it was Zoic that did a lot of the original visual effects for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They went on to do Firefly and then the remake of Battlestar Galactica. And they also do a lot of commercial stuff. I've been to Zoic Studios. I haven't worked for them, but I know a lot of people who have. You know, it's another mid-sized studio in LA. At least it was back in the day. I don't know anything about it now. I think they moved on to doing a lot of commercial stuff. So, but it was a cool studio. Similar to, you know, not quite as big as Bad Robot was, but bigger than Prologue. I don't know. That probably doesn't make any sense to anybody. It's like, you know, imaginary forces, that kind of thing. Unless you work in LA, none of what I'm saying makes any sense. But back then, of course, they were probably rendering with like Maya software, Mental Ray if they were lucky, and a lot of like really goofy particle effects. It wasn't until like, I don't know if the makeup was really good for a TV show, but the visual effects didn't get any good until season 5 and season 6, and then still with the massive caveat that it was for TV back in the day. I always find it amazing that, you know, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a pretty popular TV show back in the day and still has a cult following. But then when they came out with Twilight, apparently the person who wrote the Twilight series and had never even heard of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So Twilight was what? Vampires and werewolves in high school. Pretty much the same thing. But nobody really cares, which just goes to show people don't really want originality when they're entertainment. Or there's no reason to get too hung up on being original. It's a better way to put it. Okay, so just let me go in here and sculpt a little bit more of this. And just kind of carving a little bit of stuff in here to add some visual interest, and then I'll use the Damien standard brush just to kind of supplement some of this detail. Sort of alternating, holding the Alt key and releasing the Alt key so that I get these kinds of overlapping lines, which I can kind of crisscross a little bit, a little cross hatching to kind of imply kind of a, you know, break. Something that's sort of organic. I mean, most of these types of exoskeletons are basically built up in layers of well, insects. It's chitin, and of course, spiders, like many insects, also molt. A lot of times, when you think you find a dead spider in your house, you really just found its old molt. Basically, it's laundry. But you know, as they wear out the carapace, it gets cracks and this kind of stuff. Just, you know, can look at this stage a bit like a little too leathery, but it's okay when you do this kind of cross-hatching detail. Like this can look a lot like leather, but it's okay when you put on like a translucent material, because it'll, you know, pick up the highlights and the specular highlights and look more like an exoskeleton. With this material on while I'm sculpting, it can look a little bit too leathery. And in some cases, some spiders can appear even more leathery, like the really big ones. Like if you look at amblypogids, the cave spiders, they have a kind of a leathery look to them, even though it's not leather. It's not leather. A leather spider is a good name for a band, though. I have no idea what kind of music they would play, or what kind of venue. I did see the Leather Nun in concert one time. That was a long time ago. We won't talk about them, though. It's not really family entertainment. Okay, so I got some kind of interesting detail going on here. What I might do is, let's do this. Let's save it. I'm going to add a little bit of surface noise. I'm just playing with the settings here a little bit. Something like that. It's kind of cool. It's okay. Then I'm going to apply to mesh. So just have a little extra detail noise there. And then I'm going to store a morph target. So this morph target button down here. And maybe store a history state as well. And let's go in here to clay polish. I'll do a clay polish. It's going to knock back a lot of that detail, but you can see it leaves that little bit of a mask there. I'm going to invert the mask. Control H to hide the mask. I'll use something like inflate. Just come along here, along these edges here. Let's see. Oh, that's kind of cool. I like to make the edges look a little bit more worn. You know, I mean, it's hard to see in this image because it's low resolution, but you know, just smooth it out a little bit. So just have a little bit of detail there. Something to catch the light. Something like that. Whoops. I'll get rid of it too much. And then do more of this in the bottom here. You can see how that really brings out those forms, makes it look a little bit more natural. Hold the shift brush and just smooth it a bit. Even some of these obvious brush strokes, I mean, this is behind the legs, so it's pointless for me to do detail there. But just to demonstrate, sometimes even those obvious brush strokes that are left over from the clay tubes can end up looking like kind of cool detail underneath this kind of stuff. That's why I kind of like to sculpt very loosely and not get hung up on making things overly precise when I'm doing something organic like this. And I also, I'm still using the brush. I'm using the inflate brush with this mask right now. And rather than just using an overall inflate that you could do with a deformation, I like to brush it on because I can vary the pressure of the pen as I stroke on here and make it a little bit more natural looking, as opposed to just applying like a noise, a procedural noise, which can end up looking very CG. You get that 90s CG look, I think I might do this a little bit along these edges here, not quite as dramatically though. Just here and there. And I'm going to mostly I think, okay, just do a little bit. And over here, a little bit. And then I'm going to clear the mask and get my morph brush, because I like some of that detail. Whoops. Get that out of the way. Morph brush, and then just bring back some of that surface noise, because I like the way that it looked. It's really, really subtle, as you can see. You can barely see it, but I think it's I think it'll look nice in here. Yeah, spiders are, yeah, I'll repeat the technique in just a second. It's technique that I use way too much, but it's because it works. So this is basically, here, let me go over to the abdomen real quick. All right. Yes, I know, thank you. First of all, this is 18,000. It's just a sphere at this point. But I'm just going to demonstrate this really quick. But I'll do a quick Z remesh. And then subdivide it to get, because I want to get a few million points here. 4 million points. It's hard to tell, but that's 4 million. 4 million points. And then first I usually go in here and do the large, what I would say call like the secondary forms, maybe even tertiary forms. But just something on here to get a certain amount of roughness. Maybe the clay tubes brush or whatever. Just to get kind of a nice undercoat of organic lumpiness. Smooth it out. And then maybe go in here and apply some surface noise. Blah, brain stopped. Surface right here. Noise. Go in here. And maybe bring up the scale a little bit and just play it, just get something that looks cool. Something like that. All right. And then I'm going to apply it to the mesh. Right, which when you apply it to the mesh, you can see it's not quite as strong as before you do that. Maybe store morph target, store the undo history, why not? And then what I'm going to do, this is the part that's a little bit different. So now I have an overall procedural noise on top of the model, which is kind of neat, but at the same time kind of dull looking. It's too uniform. So at this point, what I'll do is go into geometry, clay polish, right here, clay polish. You can mess with these settings. I'll just leave them where they are. Do clay polish. That's going to knock everything back. You can see that it's if I press Control H, you can see that the detail is not that strong. If I press Control H again, you see this dark shading. That's a mask. That mask is left over by the clay polish. The clay polish evens out or does an overall polish to the entire surface, and in the process it leaves a mask behind on that area that was, on that noise that was created by the surface noise. All right, so I'm going to invert that mask, Control I. I'm going to hide it, Control H, and then go over with the smooth brush and utilizing that mask, bring out some of that detail. So I'm using the inflate brush here. Sorry, I'm going to say inflate brush and then smooth. And you can see now I have something that it looks totally different. It looks more like organic pores, something that you might see on, it's great for zombie flesh, for, you know, some human flesh in some cases, but it's also really good for organic surfaces like exoskeletons. And I'm using the inflate brush and varying the strength because I don't want these things to be so uniform. You can also alternate, you know, if I hold the Alt key, then it's inflating inwards and I get a very different quality. So I'll smooth that and then not hold the Alt key, and you can see how you can create these kinds of variations, you know. I think it looked kind of cool. So this might not be the detail that I'm going to use for the abdomen. I just want to kind of show you that's the overall technique. So I'll go back to this guy right here. And we can see that's kind of the result right now. So what I'm going to do, let's save this guy. Yeah, that's a technique that I started using and abusing a few years ago because I discovered it by accident, basically. I was using they had just introduced the clay polish brush, or the clay polish feature, and I was testing it out, and I applied it to my model, and then I started sculpting my model, and everything was going weird and haywire, but it looked really cool, and that's when I realized, oh, it's because it has that residual mask. So now I try and take advantage of that mask whenever I can, and I use that kind of detail a lot. But you can see how it's, you know, it's fairly subtle on this model. I'm a bit more overt with it on other models. So what I'm going to do now, let's turn off symmetry, and I'm going to go over this and just, you know, maybe first get a very low intensity move brush and just kind of start to desymmetrize this. Yeah, I would say if next time you're doing like a zombie, try that. Do the surface noise, apply it to mesh, clay polish, invert the mask, inflate and smooth, inflate and smooth. And you can also try other brushes other than inflate. I experiment all the time with different brushes, not just inflate, but because you get a different kind of quality to it every time. But for doing, you know, disgusting rotting zombie flesh, it's a really cool technique. And you can also do it several times at different scales of noise, or use the noise brush so that you're layering it, or even use it with layers, and you get some really cool results. This particular guy, this spider, then the detail on it is so subtle that I don't want to overdo it. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit of asymmetry in here, and then I'm just going to make some marks with this brush. The other nice thing about that technique is it's something that looks like it takes hours to do, but you can do it really in just a few minutes. So just the one thing I would request that people stop doing, stop making the creature with the spider body and the torso of a naked woman on top of it. I think I mentioned this last live stream. When I was teaching ZBrush at Nomen, every semester somebody did that. And I always thought they'd come up with an idea. And I've come up with ideas before that turned out to be not my ideas at all, that were just floating around in my subconscious. But I can't stand to see any more spider ladies. No more spider ladies, please. Please, no more spider ladies. I've seen way too many spider ladies. It's the same thing. Another thing that drives me crazy is when people make sexy Medusas. Like, I did a Medusa model a very, very long time ago in ZBrush when I wrote my ZBrush book way back in the days of ZBrush 3. And I went out of my way to make a very Ray Harryhausen scary looking Medusa. And, you know, by today's standards, maybe not the greatest model in the world, but that was like 20 years ago. But at least I was proud of the fact that I didn't succumb to the temptation to make Medusa sexy. Because she was sexy, according to the original, or not the original, but the original myth of Medusa is very vague. She's just a gorgon, right? And then I think it was the poet Ovid that sort of retold her story and made it a tragedy. And the story is a great tragedy. I mean, it's really horrible. This poor woman was born unbelievably good looking. It's not her fault. She just had good genes. And one of the gods, I forget which one it was. It wasn't Aphrodite. It was Hera, I think, or something like that. I forget which god. One of the goddesses was a real jerk and very jealous of this woman's beauty, and so she cursed her. And she basically made her so ugly that the mere sight of her would turn men to stone. You know, and then Clash of the Titans in the 80s, the original good Clash of the Titans with Ray Harryhausen, you know, they took that and played with a little bit, you know, making it kind of like a superpower of hers, but still staying pretty close to the myth of Perseus, you know. But it's a great story. But it's like, I always see people as like, okay, well, let's do a sexy girl and give her snake hair. And I'm like, that's not Medusa, man. Medusa's supposed to be a tragically ugly woman because she's been cursed. Ugliest woman in the universe. I find that to be much more interesting than sexy Medusa. But maybe there's an alternate Medusa story where she's just sexy with snake hair, and it's got to be a real pain to brush her hair in the morning. Okay, I think I did this a little bit too veiny here. I just got a little carried away, so I'm just going to knock it back with a smooth brush. I don't need that much detail. You know, I can always go in here with the morph brush since I've stored a morph target and just kind of, you know, do this. I think that looks worse. Let me undo that. That's okay. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do, let's save this, is let's bring back our reference here. All right, PureRef, what's going on here? Okay. I think I have two versions of it running, but that's okay. So I want to look at the little hairy bit up here. So I'm going to make a little bit of a texture in there, then I'm going to start painting it. So for this, what I think I'll do is let's get the standard. Actually, a good way to do this is use Damien standard, but I'm going to change the alpha. Something a bit thicker. Maybe something like this. I'll switch it to Z add. There we go. And just kind of make something that looks a little bit like hair. This is like one of my favorite natural kind of looks, when you have a diffuse kind of hairy part on top of a very translucent part. And then on top of that, you've got also these dark, shiny eyeballs. I think that looks really cool. Let's turn off solo for a second. And transparency. It's just such a neat combination of materials that's fun to try and replicate. Trying to get the idea of draw size here. I know this detail isn't in this image, but it's in one of them. You can see they're all a little bit different. See if I can find it. This guy has just a few little hairs that are trailing off there, so I'm overdoing it a little bit, but you can see it's in a few of them. But just it's such a cool little cool little hairdo. Sorry, my elbow hit my numeric keypad there. I'm sorry. When creating your sculpts, do you have in mind to do 3D print these, or will those small details come out in the final print? Or do you have final pass with the contrast slider enhance the details? Try the technique without the noise. The clay tube texture gives a nice veiny loose skin feel. Very cool. Yeah, so I actually posted a video on my YouTube channel today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to plug myself. I always love that. It's not exactly, I mean, it's 3D printing. But generally speaking, when I do my first pass at 3D printing, I don't think so much of the details in terms of the printing, because there's always techniques for bringing it out at the end, like you mentioned with the contrast, or even with projecting history after you decimate and all that kind of stuff. So I just posted this video today on prepping a model for 3D printing using a beetle model, so you can check that out. That's more about using the 3D Print Hub plugin. For something like this, this I think would work pretty well at a 3D print. You know, I might tighten it up to make it look more like hair. Right now this is kind of a first pass. But yeah, I think what you could do is, you know, as you're prepping it for printing, before you do like a decimation, you can actually store your history, and then use the history brush to kind of bring it back if the decimation loses the detail too much. The other thing is, you know, try to make it look as 3D as possible. You know, these overlapping hairs with a little bit of undercut. And then the other thing you can do, when I've done arachnids with CDM Australia, which is a print company, the long spindly hairs, they usually attach that afterwards on the 3D model, sort of like a practical effect kind of thing, which I've done something similar with like fishing line, or like a nylon guitar string. No, fishing line. I don't know if that answers your question though. The small details will come out on the print depending on the printer that you use, but I've actually, when I was in LA, I had a Form Z printer that was pretty good, and a lot of these details came out okay. When I was working with ZBrush jewelry workshops, when we'd print something for jewelry that was going to be cast in metal, the print was I forget the name of her printer, but it was a much more expensive printer, something in the $20,000 range. But there's a really great, some really great YouTube channels on 3D printing and ZBrush. One in particular is Vogband. Let me see if I can find this channel real quick. This guy right here, not only is his videos really good, they're also really entertaining. And he does reviews of printers. Some of the best. Oh, look, there's one of my rings. He does really great, entertaining reviews, and he tests everything out. And a lot of really great advice on how to get the most detail out of your 3D prints when you're sculpting with ZBrush. We worked with him a bit, and he's just awesome. So I highly recommend checking out his channel for more details on 3D print. If I'm doing this for animation, what I might do is sculpt these types of hairs and then have that on the model with, displacement or normal map, and then use something like Yeti or XGen to put the hairs on top of it. So this is just sort of like cover up the bald spot. But it depends. Like if you might look good with a little bit of sparseness if you have some of that translucency coming through from underneath. I don't know if that makes any sense. I sold my 3D printer to a friend of mine when I moved to Europe. So I have to get a new 3D printer. This is on the list. Right now I'm more concerned about getting air conditioning for the house. Once I get the air conditioning, then first you get the air conditioning, then you get the then you get the 3D printer. So that was a Scarface reference. In case anybody who's watching that I might be married to want to know why I talked about getting the women. Scarface. In America, first you get the money, then you get the women. I don't think I've watched that movie since like high school. Might be getting a little too random. It looks okay. It'll look better when I do a little painting on top of it. Since I stored a morph brush, I can go in here and knock some of this back. I need to. Those places where it's stretching or where I got a little too crazy with it. Could also be using 3D layers, but I always forget to use 3D layers. When I use 3D layers, I always forget which layer I'm on, and I don't know. It's not my favorite workflow, but other people really like 3D layers. When I was doing the Katie did model a few weeks ago, I was using 3D layers for poly paint, which I might do on this as well. Okay, so let's say we have something like that. Very cute. Let's save this. I'm going to save next. '41st anniversary of Conan the Destroyer. That's awesome. Conan, a lot of people don't know this. He went on to be governor of California. It's true. It's funny because I moved to California in 2005, and that was shortly after he became governor, Arnold. And at the time, nobody took him serious. It was the most crazy thing in the world back then. Things have gotten much worse since then. But anyways, I remember going to the DMV to get my California license and seeing his picture on the wall of the DMV for California governor and just thinking it was the weirdest thing back then. Things have gotten much stranger since then. Conan movies are awesome, though. Is Conan the Destroyer the one where he swings the person around, or he gets swung around by the monster in circles? I forget which one that is. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I've saved this, is let's do some poly painting just for fun, just so we're doing something other than just sculpting all night. Normally I do the entire model first, all the modeling, and then I do the poly painting, but sometimes, you know, it's kind of fun to play around with this. Helps me develop the personality of the character a bit more. So I'm using the white material just to begin with, just so I can concentrate on the colors, and then we'll play with doing a red shift material. So what I will do is, let's fill it with green. Get a nice greenish hue, a little pale green. And I'm going to switch to the paintbrush. And I'm going to hold the shift key and turn off Z add, so it's a blur brush now. So RGB intensity is 100. And let's do color fill object. And then for the paintbrush, I'm going to lower the RGB intensity. And let's do a quick masking, cavity mask. Something like that's pretty good. And I might blur the mask. I'm going to control click on it and blur it a little bit. And let's grow the mask a little bit. And invert the mask. And I'm going to put in this kind of cool darker blue in here. So bring this down to blue. Color, fill object. Let's get something like that. I'm not going to worry about this part just yet. And then we can see that this is what I love about doing sort of natural objects, because we have, we have greens, but we have cool greens, and we also have warm greens in these sort of blotchy areas. So it's a nice mixture of all these different types of greens. So what I'll do now is maybe I'll switch to, actually I'm going to select that color. I already have it selected, and just kind of paint in this area. Let's do color spray, set the color variation to 0. Choose an alpha like this, bring up the RGB intensity. Clear the mask. There we go. A little bit more. There we go. That's better. And just kind of here and there, you can do some squiggly lines. The Titanic meme where they cut. I think it's the Titanic, right? Where they cut between the woman dancing and then Conan being swung around. That's kind of ruined that scene in the movie for me. That's all I can think of now. I think my favorite Schwarzenegger movie is, Terminator 1 and 2, of course, are great, but my favorite has got to be the Mars one, Total Recall. But I love Verhoeven. I love Verhoeven movies. It's so over the top. Obviously, Starship Trooper is one of my favorites. I should do a Starship Trooper bug for the live stream at some point. That might be a fun project to do. So I'm gonna do a yellowish green now, and lower the Z intensity. I'm sorry, the RGB intensity, and just get a little blotchy with it here and there. Yeah, maybe I'll do that after I finish the spider project. So we can get some good reference images for that. Nice little homage. The bugs in that movie were surprisingly good for the day, and of course also so was the 3D in that movie. Still holds up pretty well considering how old it was. Back then, I was a huge Lightwave nerd. I was really into Lightwave, and I remember they tried to do the Starship Troopers TV show. It was not very good, but I remember it was one of the first TV shows that really tried to go all CG, and I remember they used Lightwave for it. I was all excited, but it was hard to keep it up. I think Lightwave is also a big thing they used in Firefly, and also, if I'm not mistaken, also Battlestar Galactica. They used some Lightwave and also some Moto. If you're not sure what Lightwave is, ask your grandparents. Back in my day, you had to do animation and modeling in 2 separate programs. Also, for those of you who don't know, the rendering engine Arnold is actually named after Arnold Schwarzenegger. Because I guess the developer just didn't know what to name it. He thought it was funny to call it that or something like that. That's what I've heard. Okay, so I got that kind of going. It's a little bit on the light side, so I'm going to do another pass with a dark cool green, maybe this kind of color, to kind of offset some of the lightness of the yellow splotches. This is kind of like a back and forth. Give them rosy cheeks. There's also a certain amount of pale white, sort of a subsurface pale color. I don't know if I'm going to paint that in there though. I'll see. I'll play with the material and see if we need to. And sometimes what I'll do with poly paint is get some of these colors down. Kind of like this. Of course, I got to do these little dark splotches, but I'll do that last. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select white, or maybe a very pale light green, and switch my alpha. I'm still using the spray stroke, but I'll switch my alpha to like tiny dot, kind of like this. And then just kind of paint over with that dot. And this is a technique that I learned from, or adapted from Madeline Spencer's kind of approach to poly painting. I can get some of that paleness in as an overlay to all those other colors. But it's like fun to blend these colors together and see them. The results. And then I'm using the blur brush, the smooth brush, to kind of blend them together on top of that. And it sort of hints at, by doing that sort of additional layer of sort of white splotchiness on top of everything else and then blurring it together, it kind of makes those other colors look a little bit more subsurfacey without actually using a subsurface material. So that hopefully the goal is that when I do add a subsurface material, that kind of paint enhances it. Makes it a little bit easier to get this kind of translucency that I'm going for. We'll see. It's always experimentation, and sometimes it takes a few tries before it starts to come to really come together. But it is a fun process to kind of experiment with. And you can keep, doing layering this stuff on top of each other, just these different colors, sort of blotches in different areas. Okay, so let's save that. I might have to go back and do another pass of green, but that's okay. What I'm going to do now is paint the colors on these hairs. So for that, what I'm going to do is let's switch back to freehand. I'll stick to this alpha, but I'll bring up the RGB intensity. And the thing is, let's fill those eyes with a nice black color. Get rid of lazy mouse. Okay, so we got that, and then get some. I'm going to do a little masking here, so we can kind of. Let's do mask by smoothness. Let's try curvature. That's pretty good. Peaks and valleys. I'm going to hide the mask, so I'm just going to paint some warm yellowish browns, oranges over this. There we go, that's faster. That can be fixed. Fixing the holes is something you want to do later on in the process. When I'm sculpting something for 3D printing, I'm not worrying about the technical aspects while I'm actually making the model too much. because all of that stuff could be fixed at the end. And also, I'm usually thinking of like, if I could make one model that I can then convert into a 3D print and also use for animation and also use for other things, then I'm just going to focus on making the best model that I can. And then, like I showed in that video that I posted today, what you do is you're going to use a combination of Dynamesh and some other techniques to close up any holes. Because a lot of times what I'll do is like in the beetle model I had that I showed in that YouTube video, I have the elytra, which is the carapace, the head, the mandibles, the bottom, all the separate subtools. So I used a union operation to merge those all into one piece, right? That's the piece that I want to prep for 3D printing. And then what I'll do is I'll Dynamesh that piece at fairly high resolution so that I don't lose any details. And the nice thing is, like, you know, using a Boolean, it's making a copy of the subtool, so it can always project details from the original subtools back onto this printing model. What I'll do is I'll, you know, Dynamesh that, and then I'll go through in all the areas that I know are going to cause problems, whether it's a gap or a hole, or when you have sort of intersecting geometry on the inside of the model. If you Dynamesh the outside and focus on closing all those holes, and you just keep re-Dynameshing as you go, what it does is it gradually builds that sort of outer shell. There's other ways to do it in ZBrush, but Dynamesh is a more elegant way to go about doing it. You can create like a unified mesh or something like that if it's really difficult. And the other things I'll do is I'll use an insert mesh brush and just jam in little spheres like balls of clay in those real problem areas, and then Dynamesh to make a single surface. And I'll just keep doing that. And then check it as I go using the 3D print hub, using the check mesh volume button. There used to be a really cool plugin for, especially for jewelers, but it's no longer supported, that had a better way of checking the volume. But that 3D print hub's okay. Then once I have everything and I get a proper result from check mesh volume, once it actually gives me a volume in cubic millimeters, then I know that the object is watertight. And at that point, it's probably, you know, it could be anywhere like 5 million or something like that. At that point, I'm going to use Decimation Master to get it to a lower point count while preserving the detail. So we want to decimate it and get it below 1 million points, because as I learned from Thomas Wittelsbach, who I learned a lot of these techniques from, you know, if your point count is too high and you send it to your 3D printer, it has the potential of crashing the software while you're in mid 3D print, and that's bad because you've wasted a whole lot of resources and time. So you want to get a lower 3D point count to try and avoid that, and Decimation Master is the way to go. I hope that answers your question. So I don't worry about it being solid until I'm finished the model, and then I prep it for 3D print. Make sense? Oh, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the jumping spider workshop. That was a really a fun one to do, and I love jumping spiders. They're so much fun. I'm going to clear the mask on this, and now what I'm going to do is go back to freehand. You use an alpha like this, maybe a slightly different color, maybe like a pale yellow. And just go in here and fill in some of these little greener areas here. Actually, I might make this a bit darker so it appears as like shadowing. Right now, this is currently the only streaming that I do, and I do this once a week on Monday nights. But I'm hoping once I get time, because I just have a lot of projects going on right now, so I haven't had a lot of time to set up a regular streaming. But I'd like to do that in the future. It's definitely a goal of mine. In terms of hollowing out the model, in some cases, I haven't had to do that too much, but then again, there's some cases like if you were printing, like one of the first 3D prints I actually did with a friend, had this big abdomen, and it was printed as a solid model, so it was just like a big chunk of plastic, which was a huge waste of resources and took forever to print. So if I was going to print this as like a really large model, I would probably hollow this out and create a shell, with a certain amount of thickness, so that it's not just a big dead weight of plastic. I mean, it's like this thing, sort of John Brown's models. This is great because it's, solid, but it's also, I don't know, it's a reference model, so it's good this is solid. But if I was doing something like this, I probably would hollow it out just so it's not so heavy and thick and a waste of unnecessary use of plastic, I should say. I don't know if that answers your question. But a lot of the prints that I've done, in the past few years have been either just kind of experiments or as cast as in metal for jewelry. So I did a bunch of rings and some other things like that. In those cases, for the test prints, I didn't need to hollow them out. The prints that I did for CDM, for the Western Australian Museum, I didn't actually handle the printing part of that, which was nice. I did prepare them for printing, splitting up the models and making it scale and everything, but they have really high-end printers there, and also people who are much more experienced in actually doing the printing than me, so they worry a lot about that stuff. And they print in like translucent materials and things like that, and then paint them when they're done, and they look really awesome. Someday I hope to go to Australia and actually see those models in person. It's a little bit sad that I've spent so much time on all these different bug models to be printed, and I've never seen the final result in person. I printed a few smaller versions for myself, but the other thing I'm hoping to do is start to post like weekly on my YouTube channel, even if it's just a short. It's just taken me a while to find the time to do it. So if I do stuff on my YouTube channel, it could be more than just ZBrush. When I'm doing the ZBrush live stream, obviously I'm doing it to highlight all the awesome and wonderful features of ZBrush, which is my favorite 3D program. But obviously I'm not going to talk about things like Maya or other programs here. But I can on my YouTube channel, so I'll talk more about that kind of stuff. Other CG programs. Not that you need any other 3D programs. You should actually delete all your other 3D programs and only use ZBrush for everything. And it's only $1. Okay, so it looks a little crummy, but that's okay because this is just sort of an undercoat. It's intentionally crummy. I just want to get a little blend of colors on here, and then what I'll do is let's do some more masking. Maybe now I'll do mask by peaks and valleys. And I'm going to hide that mask. Do a spray stroke on top. Yeah, I can talk about animation on my YouTube channel, which is something that is a lot of fun, especially with bugs, because every bug has its own way of moving, its own personality. And you know this intuitively because if you're sitting around your house and you catch something out of the corner of your eye, you pretty much instantly know if it's like a housefly as opposed to like a bee or a spider, a jumping spider or something like that. You just know because your brain is attuned to those differences. So when you try and like animate that, then it becomes very interesting because you're trying to analyze, what makes a fly movement look more like a fly than say a beetle. What is about its particular brand of twitchiness that, or as opposed to a bee, which is going to have more of a hovering quality or a different kind of hovering quality than a fly that's going to be zipping around most of the time. A house fly. Of course, there are hover flies that literally hover, and those things are like pretty much motionless. And then when you think about how they walk, if they're crawling on the surface, how do you emulate that wonderful brand of twitchiness? It's something I've tried with varying success over the years, coming up with different formulas to try and emulate animation software. Sometimes I'm more successful than others. I look back at some of my older animations and I'm like, but that's part of the process. We all go through that. There's definitely some things I want to go back and fix. Dragonfly is another great one. Totally different movement for a dragonfly than say a mosquito. I think, the thing I like about animation is I don't get to do it as much as I do modeling, but it really is, it's very similar to sculpting when that you block out these major forms of motion, and then you're just basically whittling down with secondary forms of motion and tertiary forms of motion on top of that. You're kind of sculpting movement, which I think is a lot of fun. There's also the movement of wings in flight. Insects, the wings don't just go up and down. They basically swim through the air. They push the air. They do more of this kind of thing, but very, very fast. Okay, am I getting better? Or am I making it worse? I think I'm making it worse. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of Z add to this, or actually maybe what I'll do this. I'm going to go back to my TW cloth, but I'm going to turn on RGB so that I can add a little bit of color and layer some more strokes on this. I think I've gone a little bit too far from my original vision. Now that's better. There we go. Actually, let's bring down the RGB intensity. That's too much. Which software is best for animation? That's really good, because a good question, because it's going to inspire some angry debates. I'll tell you what, I use Maya, but I've been using Maya literally since 1999. So it's the software I know the best. I did use, like I mentioned, Lightwave for a while and other animation programs, and experiment with Modo, and I'm now just getting into Blender. Obviously, some people are going to like Blender a lot more. Blender, I would say, at the risk of offending the Blender heads out there, Blender's only become useful as an animation tool in the past, since like maybe 2018 or 2019. That's when it first started really becoming useful, in my opinion, as an actual production tool. In other words, something you could use in the studio. Obviously, now it's, they created Flow, which won Oscars with Blender. So Blender is definitely a pro-level animation tool now. I just don't know it as well as I know Maya. I'm in the process of rigging a bumblebee model using Blender just to sort of learn the tools. And it's just like learning a different language or a different dialect. I have to get used to the way Blender approaches rigging, which is very different than Maya. Well, not very different, but somewhat different than Maya. I think Maya's animation tools are excellent, but it's taken years to get to that point. The graph editor in Maya is fantastic. It has a lot of great animation tools. Animation layers are really great in Maya and very easy to use. The rigging tools in Maya, I think, are the best, but they do take a long time to learn, and there's a lot to them. There's a lot of rigging stuff that I've never even touched that's in Maya. So Maya is great. The downside with Maya is that if you're going to use it legally, which I always encourage people to use software legally, it's expensive. And the great benefit to Blender is it's cheap. The downside of Blender is you often have to rely on third-party plugins and scripts to get the same kind of functionality, any kind of specific functionality. But that being said, there's benefits and drawbacks to both. If you get into, if you want to go crazy with animation, use Houdini. Houdini is absolutely amazing, but for me, going from Maya to Blender is like going from English to French. Going from Maya to Houdini is like going from English to Chinese. It's very, very different. I've taken Houdini classes and I've played with Houdini and I've done a few things here and there, but I haven't really put down the time to actually learn it. But Houdini is freaking amazing. And Cinema 4D is a great tool as well. Cinema 4D is more similar to Houdini than it is to Maya because of it's got so many procedural and parametric tools. I usually do a lot of work with Cinema 4D artists, so it's usually a lot of, like when I work with Filmograph, we do title sequences for like John Wick and Wednesday and stuff like that. It's usually a combination of artists using Cinema 4D and Maya, and I usually do the ZBrush stuff, and then everything's rendered and composited together in like After Effects. Usually After Effects, because that's motion graphics, not as much Nuke, although they've used Nuke for a few things. And sometimes I've worked on a few projects where we used Houdini as well. For the most part, for animation, it's Maya and Cinema 4D. And that's not an unusual workflow, for a lot of studios. I think I've gone a little bit overboard with the hair here, but still doesn't quite have the quality that I'm looking for. So I might come back to it because it's starting to drift away from what I want. Come on. Might just need to get some grays in there, some shadowing. Let's try that. I'm going to click on this and get some darker grays. And I think if I start putting these like black dots in there, it'll look better too. That's helping somewhat, I think. Oh, that's a really good question about the security risk. Here's, I can't speak for big studios. I mean, the thing is a big studio, really big studios obviously tend to use proprietary software. Like DreamWorks has all its own tools. Medium-sized studios, like let's say when I worked at Big Robot or something like that, will tend to use Maya, and since they have a Maya infrastructure, they'll probably stick with Maya for a while. I think that Blender will obviously be more adapted by the smaller studios. The advantage that Blender has now is it has a really strong user base, a lot of young animators know Blender more than they know Maya, right? And so then you have a talent pool now that's well versed in Blender that makes your life a little bit easier in hiring. But I think your point about the security risk is a really good one. Because the other thing that I've noticed when I've worked, on-site at studios, the past few years I've been working in my own home studio, which is my preferred way of working. But when you work on-site at a studio, it's difficult to go in there and start requesting that they install, a whole bunch of scripts and plugins on your machine because, as you mentioned, it's a security risk. It's also a pain in the butt for the IT guys to have to deal with, 7 different artists, and each one has their own custom, unique setup with all these different scripts and plugins. They got to support those plugins if something goes wrong. And then, of course, it's not unusual for a studio for you to have to constantly change machines, and changing profiles. It becomes a real pain in the neck. So a lot of smaller studios will be kind of like stingy and say, listen, you're using, plain vanilla Maya, maybe with some rendering plugins or plug-in for hair here and there, but we don't really want to spend time supporting all these different scripts and things like that because it's takes away from the IT department what they're trying to do. And then if you go in there, I've seen people do this where they go into a studio and they're like, can I bring in my own machine and work on my own machine here in the studio? And generally the IT guy will just sit there and laugh at such a request because it's like, you're asking me to bring in a whole bunch of different viruses and your own pirated software and all this kind of stuff. So usually you can't rely on using your own machine in a studio. So for that reason, like you mentioned, it might make it difficult for bigger studios to adopt something like Blender because they just don't have the time and energy to support it. That might change though, Maya became the industry standard not necessarily because it was the best, but because they actually, if you don't pretend Lightwave doesn't exist, back in the day they were the first big animation package to start making their pricing much more competitive. Believe it or not, it's still really expensive now, like what, is it $2,000 or so a year to maintain a professional license. But when I started using Maya back in 1999, a software license for Maya was $16,000. And that didn't even include the equipment necessary to render it. So you started out very, very expensive. And then they brought down their price and changed their pricing to become competitive so that more studios adopted it, and it became the industry standard. Yeah, I think it's starting to look okay. I'm still not super crazy about it, but it's starting to take shape. I think I might do a few more passes, but right now I think I'll let it be because I'm starting to obsess over it, and it's kind of distracting. I think what I like to do is I only got about 10 minutes left today is maybe start adding some of these little black splotches because those things will start to make things come alive even more. And some of this dull quality of this that you see in here, I mean, this is kind of super brightly colored. I'll bring that in when I started playing with the material and maybe do a little bit more painting, but just wanted to get something started today. So let's take a look at our dot pattern here and just compare these different. So we have these in the back right here. These are the eyes, obviously. Let's get this. I love this though, that looks so cool. So it looks very consistent in the placement of these two black dots. It's almost as if it's adding, yeah, it's pretty consistent in terms of the placement. And it's partially camouflage, it's partially also, in a way, kind of like extra eye spots. So I'm going to make these black and then add a little bit of that red, but I'm going to sample the black here and just Switch color. Thank you. Oh, I see what the problem is. Let me come back to paint. This guy's nice. Lighting is going to make a lot of effect in there. I do feel like Maya is pretty stagnant. It doesn't seem like they've released anything innovative the past couple of years. Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that one. I'm not a diehard. I've used Maya forever. Literally written books about it, and I taught it at Noman and all this kind of stuff. So I've been using Maya for a long time, but I have no strong love for it. And that's kind of why. It's kind of like, I always, they're owned by such a huge corporation, and Autodesk makes so much money off of their CAD software that the entertainment software to them it's negligible. It's like their lunch money. So it creates a real problem for users because you don't feel like we're really, Pixelogic is a very small company. Even Maxon is a very small company. And so you tend to get a more direct connection with the user base. They actually care. And it's the same thing with, like Blender. It's more of a community. They really care about the artists. I rarely feel like Autodesk is like going out of its way to make sure that its users are happy. They tend to have that come across as that more sort of giant soulless corporation kind of thing, which is too bad, There was a time, like when I started using Maya, it was owned by Silicon Graphics that made the SGI machines. I don't know, is Silicon Graphics even around anymore? Let me just put placeholders for these dots right here. And then for a very short time, I'm talking about less than a year, maybe 9 months, Alias Wavefront became its own company. And it was a very small company, and they were really, really passionate about Maya. And they were really excited. I remember going to user meetings at SIGGRAPH and even just Maya user meetings, and it was just an amazing feeling to be a Maya artist back then. And then I was actually working at Ewan Company when we got the horrible news one morning. Everybody showed up to work, excited to do their work in Maya, and we all got the news that Autodesk had bought Maya, and it was just like, everybody was so depressed. It was like, oh well, there goes the fun. And it's true, it's Maya's done some cool stuff, but I don't know, it's very hard to get super excited over it, It's like when Apple does something innovative. A long time ago, you used to be like, oh my God, I can't believe Apple did that. Nowadays, it's like, oh, Apple did something cool, whatever. They're just too big a company, too much money in there. Anyways, I'm probably going to get targeted now that I've been bad-mouthing the big companies, but they're going to send me angry emails or something. Yeah, Houdini is a smart move, because I also remember Houdini was Side Effects, small, extremely passionate company, and they've kind of maintained that kind of quality, I think. I think Side Effects is still independent software, right? Yeah, before Maya, it was just called it was like Alias Power Animator, Alias Wavefront, and then I was using it back in the Alias Wavefront days before Autodesk finally bought them out. And then, of course, back then, like Maya users and 3ds Max users were like mortal enemies. It was like the sharks and the jets from West Side Story. And then Autodesk went and bought 3ds Max, and everybody's like, well, now what do we do? Now we have to be friends with these people. these 3ds Max people. It's pretty funny. Next session is going to be Monday at the same time. So 9:30 or 12. Well, it's 9:30 where I am at here in France, but same time I started today. So, I mean, it's starting to get a little bit of a some painting in there. Needs work, but not bad considering where I started. Here's the whole model. I think the green is a little bit too light, so I'll play with that a little bit more. Needs more detail in the hair area, and then more of the black spots, more detail. But he's cute, and it's going to look awesome when it's translucent, I think, or I hope. Yeah, one of these days I just feel like if I could just take like a year off and retrain my brain in Houdini, that'd be awesome. But I have such a very sculpture-based approach to modeling because of the years of being in ZBrush that Houdini is would present its issues. I know they have sculpting stuff in there. And right now I'm like, my main concern, aside from ZBrush, is to learn Blender and Unreal. And Unreal, I think, is the future for a lot of this stuff. You know, if you were to ask me what, actually, you know, somebody was asking earlier about animation software, I'd almost say the best way to learn, if you really want to be prepared for the future, is do everything you can to learn how to work in Unreal. And obviously there's Unreal bridges to Houdini, there's Unreal bridges to Blender, and things like that, and that's going to continue. So, and you can animate more and more in Unreal itself. They have a graph editor now and all that kind of stuff. So it's just like, you know, my advice to any young aspiring CG artist or even old aspiring CG artist is get into Unreal as quickly as possible, and adapt your skills towards that, because that's where the future is. Anything that cuts down on render time is something that companies are very, very excited about, because rendering is such a huge bottleneck and such an expenditure of resources that you know, the more money they can save on that, the happier they'll be. And you know, that's an interesting thing. We always talk about AI in these sessions. A lot of people don't realize that the AI video stuff that you see is taking over right now, that takes a different type of processing and rendering time, and it's a high level resources. That's why all these billionaires or companies are trying to build these giant computer farms that are of course going to add to global warming and all that kind of stuff, but they're building these processing farms to process the fact that the AI stuff. So it's like just now when we're starting to finally get rendering under control, because we have real-time rendering in Unreal and stuff like that, these AI folks have now created a new way to spend massive amounts of computer resources needlessly, when you could probably, you know, I think one of the things that people are going to figure out about AI is that in the long run, it's a lot easier to work with an artist and get something high quality than it is to constantly sit there and prompt things and hope that what you get is the right thing and then have to re-render that kind of stuff and all that kind of, anyways, whatever, it's a whole other thing. But we're talking about technology, which tends to improve exponentially, so who knows what things are going to be like in 5 years. All right, on that note, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I hope you enjoyed my constant rambling and bizarro stories while sculpting and painting a spider. We'll continue with this guy next week and, you know, start working on maybe the legs and things like that. So thanks for joining me. See you guys.